Hello, this is Idodmg and welcome back to the channel. In this Dragon's Dogma 2 video, I want to talk to you about my opinions on the game and if I think the game's worth your time and money. We're going to talk about everything the game has to offer, as well as sharing my thoughts on all of those topics. Everything will be timestamped down below in the description for your convenience. If there's something you want to know about how maybe something works or my opinion on something in the game, go ahead and click around at your leisure. Let's go ahead, before you skip ahead in the video too soon, let's go ahead and talk about what is Dragon's Dogma 2. Dragon's Dogma 2 is primarily a single-player role-playing game with an open world to fully explore. Exploring the world is going to be the bulk of your time spent in Dragon's Dogma. There are quests, and the main story quest line is relatively short. We're going to try our best to avoid spoilers, but I think you could beat the main story campaign in probably around 30 hours if you just wanted to rush through the game. With that in mind, though, I beat the game around 59 hours, and this is because I spent several hours exploring the world. If you watch some of our stream replays from Dragon's Dogma 2, you'll see that I spent one entire stream literally just exploring, and I didn't think I did a single quest. As I mentioned, there are quests in the game. There are several main story quests in the game that require you to stealth, but there's no stealth mechanic in the game anywhere to be found. And so that can be very frustrating. One really annoying part of this is you can get stuck in a loop where you're supposed to be hiding, but you don't know that, and a guard spots you and kills you. And then as soon as you auto-load back into the game, it happens again, and you're stuck in this infinite loop. With that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about how you save your game, and kind of that's an important part of Dragon's Dogma 2. There's two different ways to save your game. The game will automatically just auto-save when they think you've done a big event in the game and the game thinks you're safe. There's obviously issues with that we've already covered. The other way that you can save in your game is by resting at an inn, a fire, or in your house, and that will actually become your inn save. So when you load up the game or when you die and you want to reload, you can choose to go from your last autosave or your last time that you rested at an inn. That's Dragon's Dogma 2 and basically what there is just upfront face value of the game. As I mentioned, it is a single player game, but there's a little bit of a twist that makes you feel like you're playing with other players by hiring other players' pawns or their characters or their followers. Every player in Dragon's Dogma gets your main character called the Arisen. This is your main character you're going to be playing throughout the game, and you can change vocations, which is the game's take on classes. We'll talk about it a little bit later in the video, but every player can also have and create their own main pawn or their own main follower that's going to be with them throughout the entire journey as well. You then have two open slots that you can hire other players' pawns. It's a really cool and fun system that I can't wait to get a little bit more in depth a little bit later on. But basically, you can hire other players' main pawns into your party to help you out. This is pretty awesome, especially if you have friends on Steam. You can hire their followers, which is pretty awesome too. They can also show up in your world as well. But let's stay focused here. A couple things I've seen with Dragon's Dogma 2 is people talking about bugs with the game. I'll admit I didn't encounter many bugs other than the save issue that I was talking about. I don't know if you want to call that a bug or what you want to call that. I mean, the game was working as intended. I just didn't hide, even though I didn't know it. So it's more of a annoyance than I would say a bug in that regard. Other than those little saving issues and those stealth quests, I really didn't encounter any sort of bugs. I also noticed some very early reviews were talking about performance issues on PC. I play on a laptop. I believe it has a 3070 Ti and 40 some gigs of RAM. I had no performance issues with the game. I had to tweak some of the settings on my end a little bit, but overall I didn't have any stuttering or any sort of performance issues with the game really. Dragon's Dogma 2 has a pretty big world to explore, and if you played one of the originals, the world in this game is much larger. There is so much to explore in this game. You'll be running around, and there'll be a random rock that maybe you'll trip over out in the world, and you'll fall down in there, and there's a whole hidden dungeon down there with a bunch of hidden goodies that you can discover as well. There's so many things to explore in the game, and I'm sure this probably won't be the last time I say that. Every little corner, every little nook and cranny, there's just so much to explore. But at the end of the day, doing all this exploring to me didn't feel that rewarding. So if you're following along here, so far we have the main story quest is pretty short, and there's some annoying stealth quests in there. Exploration, there's a lot to explore, but exploring is not very rewarding. Well, let's go ahead and try to focus on some of the good things that I found in Dragon's Dogma 2. So while you're exploring, there's different chests that you can find, from a wooden chest, and the more ornate or fancy looking the chest is, the better the item it could have in there. Now, the majority of the time when you're exploring, you're going to come across wooden chests that have a curative item, and that's your health potion or stamina potion. Because when you're fighting in combat, obviously, your health is your health, and your stamina is your energy to be able to actually fight in combat. I think that's pretty obvious. But I think that's kind of where exploration falls short, is it's like, sure, I'm finding these curatives, but that's not really that exciting. And there's some of the more ornate chests that you'll find a piece of gear in. And in my situation, a lot of times I'd find a piece of gear that I had already purchased from a vendor. And so then the item was just useless in a sense. So exploring, I want to say this, exploring, it was fun to explore, but it did not feel as rewarding as I would have liked to have been. A couple more good things about the world in Dragon's Dogma 2 is there's a lot of verticality within the game. You're going to be climbing up on really high up cliffs. You might even fight a monster at the very top of a mountain that during fighting the monster, you run the risk of literally falling off the side and dying. So you have to kind of play around that. And that's another thing I did like about exploring, was you could have the mini bosses jump out you, whether it be a cyclops, an ogre, maybe a griffin swoops down while you're fighting an ogre. Like, there's so many different scenarios for these big monsters. And that was probably my favorite part of exploring, was just fighting these enormous beasts, and you can climb up on them and hit them and stuff like that. I primarily played as a sorcerer, so I didn't have as many opportunities to climb up on the beast and try to hit their weak spots as you would with, say, a melee character. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. So on top of your mini bosses jumping out at you and taking those down, you can also interact with the environment, and there's bridges in the game that you can actually break and they fall down. And you can use that to your advantage, where the monsters, you kite them over the bridge, break the bridge, and they all fall down. There's one time that was pretty cool. There was I think it was a cyclops I was fighting, and he kind of like platformed over this gap, forming a bridge with his body that I could then get across. It's really cool to see that interaction with monsters in the environment, and then you also trying to interact with the environment as well. While you're exploring the world, you're going to come across the day and night cycle. Nighttime has different enemies, and it's very hard to see. It's kind of scary at nighttime, I'm going to be honest with you, but if you're brave, you can make it through. But I wanted to talk a little bit how you kind of rest and heal up, because the way it works in Dragon's Dogma 2 is whenever you take damage, you don't just lose health, you can heal back. But as you take damage, your maximum health you can heal up to goes down lower and lower and lower until you rest at a campfire or an inn. And there is different ways to pass time in game. So there's going to be random fires that you can set up a camping site at. And you want to make sure you clear out these campsites, because if there's monsters there when you set up camp and sleep, they'll actually raid your camp and they can destroy your camping kit. And then you can be stuck out in the wilderness without any way to camp because they've taken your camping kit. So then you have to either hoof it back to town, or hopefully you have a fairy stone to kind of help you travel. But before we talk about traveling, because that's another huge part of Dragon's Dogma 2, I want to talk a little bit more about resting. So you have the camping while you're out in the wilds. You also have the inn that you can rest in while you're in town, which does cost gold. But you can also purchase your own home in this game as well, and you can sleep at your home for free. And of course, sometimes you'll find in cities there's benches you can rest on, so you can wait for the morning, or you can wait for nightfall, or you can wait for it to become nighttime kind of thing. So the bench allows you to rest for 3 different time periods, whereas camping allows you to sleep till nighttime or morning, and then sleeping at an inn allows you to sleep until the morning. Now, keep in mind, if you're hiring the pawns, we're going to talk about here in a little bit in the video, if you rest at a campsite, your pawn won't come back and give you any of your rift coins or any of your rewards. In order to get your pawn rewards that you've sent out, you do have to rest at your house or at an inn. Another huge part of Dragon's Dogma 2 is traveling and getting around the world. The world is massive, and you're going to need to find a way to travel the world, right? A large part of your time in this game is going to be on foot, which is awesome. I absolutely love the fact that they don't just allow you to fast travel whenever you want to. Now, you can fast travel in the game, but it will cost you. What I really like about the system is this leads you to more exploration. So you may set up a point A to point B, But from going from point A to point B, you're going to get distracted with monsters coming out at you, maybe a dungeon that you missed that you want to go check out, things like that. And it may take you way longer than you thought it would to get from point A to point B. But there is ways you can travel. One of the ways you can travel in Dragon's Dogma 2 is in between towns, there's certain paths where there could be an ox cart going through. And if you're out in the world, you could come across the ox cart, pay a very small fee, hop on, and they'll bring you to the town that they're headed to. You can also rest in town and wait until the ox cart arrives in town and then ride it over to the next big city if you want. Although this is a little bit more time consuming than just fast traveling. The way that fast traveling works in this game is some of the main cities have what's called a port crystal. Once you discover it, you can use then an item called a fairy stone to teleport to that port crystal. You can even unlock port crystals that you can take and put in your backpack and put them out in the world, and then you can pick them up and put them back in your bag. And that gives you the option to allow you to anchor a place to be able to then portal to with those fairy stones. Now, those fairy stones that you use to do all this are consumable, and they cost about 10,000 gold a piece. So you're not going to be wanting to use this form of traveling all the time. Fairy stones in the game can be found from exploring. I guess that's kind of one of the rewarding parts of exploring, I guess, even though they're pretty sparse. But as I mentioned, you can also buy them for 10,000 gold as well. But now keep in mind, if let's say you're out in the wilds exploring and you want to port to town to empty your bags and come back, that will cost you 2 fairy stones. And you'd also have to set down your port crystal, go to town. That would be 20,000 gold if you're just buying those fairy stones outright. So that's traveling, kind of some of the quests, a lot of exploring. Another huge part of exploring in this game is dungeons. There's loads and loads of dungeons, and some of them are really hidden. I went back to one of the starting areas in the game, and there was like 2 or 3 dungeons that I had just completely missed. And one of them was just tucked down. It's like just literally was a tiny little hole down in the ground that I somehow missed. And when I went in there, this ended up being like an hour-long dungeon with 2 big bosses in there. It's absolutely awesome that they have these dungeons hidden. And that's one of the fun parts of exploration. Some of the dungeons in the game, as I mentioned, can be pretty massive. I think the longest dungeon I did took me an hour and a half, and that was exploring everything. And some of the dungeons, you just go in and there's like a treasure chest and you get out and, there's some in the middle. It's nice to see the varying sizes of dungeons so you never really know what you're going to be getting yourself into once you enter into one of the game's dungeons. The other thing I wanted to note in these dungeons as well is they also have verticality just like the open world. So you may think you're done exploring the dungeon and then you'll notice one little hole in the wall or maybe a breakable wall that you missed that leads to even more of the dungeon and even more to explore. It's absolutely awesome. Just exploring. I think I've mentioned it already, exploration is probably my favorite part of the game. I want to go ahead here. We've covered quite a bit, and if you're hanging out here and you're enjoying the video, don't forget that like and subscribe button. It really helps out the channel more than you know. I want to go ahead and talk here a little bit about combat. Before we get into combat, though, I want you to understand that this is from the perspective of a sorcerer. Now, the bread and butter to Dragon's Dogma 2 is the combat and being able to climb those huge monsters, those huge bosses, and being able to hit their weak points. Now, when you're playing a sorcerer, you're more of a ranged type of class, obviously, so I didn't do as much climbing on these beasts as well. So a lot of my opinions and thoughts are going to be based on that perspective. Now, once you beat the game, you can unlock a new game plus, and I've considered playing again a little bit with melee just to be able to experience that a little bit more. But yeah, I played primarily as a sorcerer. With that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about combat in Dragon's Dogma 2 from a caster's perspective. When you're in combat, the game, I guess I should have probably mentioned this at the beginning of the video, is if you're wanting to play this game with mouse and keyboard, I don't recommend it. You're going to want to use a controller for this game. And the way that they have their healing set up is if you hold down, I believe it's left bumper, and then you have up on the D-pad is healing, and down on the D-pad is your stamina potions. Now, you can juice these things. There's absolutely no cooldown on them. So if you're getting just completely comboed by a boss, you can kind of spam healing potions to get through it. And then if you want to, for when you're using sorcerer or a caster, you're using stamina to cast your spells. So if you're low on stamina, you can pop a stamina potion. And doing this, though, you will run out of consumables, which will then hinder you in future battles. So I don't recommend doing that playstyle unless it's one of the main encounters or maybe a big dragon or something like that. Another really awesome part of combat is the pawn system. So you have your main player, and then you have your main pawn, and then you can hire up to 2 other pawns. So you have 3 followers helping you out in combat. And you can hire the 2 additional pawns. You can hire them and fill in your weak spots, obviously. So I ran with 2 DPS. I was a damage dealer, and so was my main pawn. So I always hired a fighter to tank and a mage to do some healing. And the pawn healing is absolutely overpowered. And I honestly recommend usually always having a healer in the group. Not only just the mages, but if you give consumables to the other pawns, they can use those curatives on each other, and they can also come up and help you heal as well by using those curatives. Again, you're going to be consuming those items though, so you want to be a little bit smart about that. With playing the sorcerer, there's different elements that I could use in the game. You had your lightning, cold, fire, and then you also had a physical spells as well. My all-time favorite skill was this lightning ability. That once you cast it, you can continue to spam the button and keep shooting down lightning bolts to keep hitting the area. This is really fun to use, especially on like trying to kill like a harpy real quick or something like that, being able to continue to spam after the spell's been cast. Of course, consume stamina, so you can't do it forever, but still a pretty fun little mechanic. Some elements did appear to be stronger against certain types of enemies. For example, ogres appeared to be more weak against fire. And then some monsters, I think it was like the flying monsters, seemed to be weaker to lightning. I don't know exactly how all of that plays out, but it was pretty cool to see that come into effect. Some parts that I really didn't like of combat, I would say combat overall was fun and enjoyable, but I did have a little bit of issues with combat. One of them was I was not able to lock on to any of the monsters. And this is really an issue because there's some monsters in the game that have weak points, and some of these weak points, if you're not hitting them, you're actually doing no damage to the boss. So this became an issue with not being able to lock on to those weak points. And I don't know, hopefully they add that in the future just to help you out. Like you can kind of hit smart targets a little bit, but if you move your camera at the last second before you cast a skill, it won't hit the enemy at all. I wish there was a way to just lock onto monsters and the weak points for the big bosses as well. That was really one of my main complaints with combat in Dragon's Dogma 2, but overall, I thought the combat was really great. And again, I'm thinking about doing another playthrough with melee just so I can play more into those climbing mechanics and kind of see it from that side of the fence. And just, I think it might be interesting to play the game from a different perspective other than caster. If you're going to be playing Dragon's Dogma 2, I think I would recommend, if I could go back again, I would play a fighter, and then I would become a warrior, which is the 2-handed vocation. There's different vocations in the game. I only played trickster and sorcerer. My main pawn played warrior most of the time, which is a 2-hander. I also unlocked a spear vocation that had an element with it. I never played it, but it looked fun. Maybe I'll play that if I ever play New Game Plus. There's quite a wide variety of vocations, and I wish I could break them all down for you, but I only played a few since the game was pretty short for me anyway. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more here about the itemization, loot, and crafting. Crafting in Dragon's Dogma 2 is very basic. You have items that you can combine together to create curatives or different consumable items. That's about all there is with crafting. You can enhance your gear at the vendor for different materials, but I'm going to be honest with you here. I beat the game at 59 hours. I never enhanced a piece of gear once. There was just no need for it. The game overall felt a little bit too easy once I understood the mechanics with the game. But you can enhance gear, and you can unlock different forms of enchanting or enhancing gear as well. Again, I didn't see any need to do any of it. And with New Game Plus not being any more challenging, it just feels pointless. That's my take on crafting in Dragon's Dogma 2. Itemization and loot also felt pretty basic as well. I usually in my RPGs, I love to min-max my gear. There was no need for me to do that in this game. It was basically just whatever has the highest armor and defenses and maybe resistances. And then over on the weapon thing, whatever had the most magic damage I would use. I think I upgraded my weapon maybe once, like found them while exploring. I think maybe 2 or 3 different staves and maybe 2 or 3 different armor sets. Like it was just very, very, very basic when it comes to itemization and crafting. want to go ahead here. I want to talk a little bit about the pawn system. This is probably the most interesting and unique part of Dragon's Dogma, even going back to the original Dragon's Dogma. But we're going to focus on the new one here since that's what we're talking about in the video. So as I mentioned, you have your very own, your main pawn, and you can hire 2 of your friends' pawns. And not only your friends' pawns, but you can hire other players' pawns that you're not even friends with. And you can search for pawns. You can search for them by their vocation. So if you need a tank, you can search for a tank. You can search by levels. And if you want to hire a really strong pawn, it will cost you a currency in the game called Rift Coins. These Rift Coins you can find while exploring. You can also earn them when other people hire your main pawn and take them out on adventures. These Rift Coins can be bought as DLC, and we will talk about monetization here in a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit more about this pawn system. My favorite part of the pawn system was hiring in new pawns and looking at their quests. When you're searching for a pawn and you hire a pawn, you can look at their quests. Now, there's certain quests in the game that you can get where the pawn will offer you 10,000 gold if you do the quest. And it's a great way to make money. And the reason for this is if you hire 2 pawns, and let's say both our quests is to go kill a Cyclops, you kill one Cyclops, you get 20,000 gold back. Now, you set your pawn to have that same quest, so you're paying out 10,000 gold if someone else does the quest with your pawn, right? Now, it's not every time. It's only when you rest at an inn will you have to pay that 10,000 gold. So in essence, it's kind of like the game is just printing currency because I'm making all this money from all these pawn quests. I'm only paying out 10K one time if I rest at an inn. So if you're resting at campfires, you're never going to pay that fee. But in order to get your pawn to come back to you and to get your rewards, you do have to rest at an inn. So I recommend if you're doing that method, don't rest at an inn or at your house very often, maybe like once a day or whatever, or like in real life days. But that's a whole nother thing. It could probably be its own separate video. But I love the pawn quest, and I honestly only hired the people that were paying 10,000 gold to kill some of the basic monsters in the game, because that's what I was setting my pawn out to do and being a team player in the community in regards to that. Another really awesome part of pawns is each pawn can have different traits. They can have one trait, and there's different ones you can get. For example, you can get the one to use curatives like I talked about. You can get one that will automatically sort inventories amongst your pawns to kind of help you keep your weight lower, because in the game, I don't think I talked about that, but in the game you have a carrying weight, so if you're too heavy, you can't run as fast. We've seen it in other RPGs, nothing new there. You can also get a pawn trait that you can sell unwanted items to, so you don't have to go back to town, which is pretty cool. There's one that helps you find rare items. And on top of that, you can also get some pawns that can be a quest guide, so that in your quest log, you can see the icon of which pawn knows how to do that quest. And that pawn will offer to guide you on the quest. And if you hit the go command, they'll lead the way to your quest objective. This is pretty cool. And another cool thing too is if you have pawns that have been to that area before, whether it be with their arisen character or in other parties, maybe they know where a hidden chest is, they'll mention it to you. You can hit go and they'll bring you to that chest and help you find out some hidden secrets that you may have missed. It's pretty awesome. And the whole pawn system in the commentary that happens amongst the party is pretty funny. And honestly, I like it. It's immersive in that sense that you're actually adventuring with this group of other pawns at the end of the day. But pretty cool. It's a pretty cool twist on a single player RPG. Another topic worth touching on here when we're talking about Dragon's Dogma 2, because you've no doubt heard about it, is the monetization. The game is a buy-to-play game, and it is a $70 game. It's a pretty steep price. And on top of that, they are offering DLC items that you can purchase. And here's the really crappy thing about it is all these items that you can buy, you can easily get in the game. So it feels very unnecessary for these items to even be offered as a DLC or a cash shop item. And it feels very dirty, and I do not agree with it. I was an avid fan of the very first Dragon's Dogma, and I've been very pumped for Dragon's Dogma 2. So I picked up the game anyway, and honestly, after I bought the game, I didn't even know about the microtransaction stuff until after I had purchased the game, because I pre-ordered it, so I didn't know that this was going to be a thing. So I'd already spent the money, so I figured I might as well go ahead and play the game. But I want it to be noted, I absolutely don't think there should be a cash shop for this game, because anyone going into the game, they're not going to know that you can get the stuff easily. It just feels very, very dirty. It just feels very, very dirty in the way that they're handling this. Kind of in the same vein here when we're talking about monetization, I mentioned the main story is very short. Now, the bulk of the game is exploring. There's loads and loads and loads of secrets that I don't even know about, and I haven't even found or anything like that. And that's really the best part of the game, is the exploration. Well, part of me wonders if the reason that there wasn't as many quests, or the main story was so short, has anything related to their survey that they send out less than a week after launch. They sent out a survey to players that you could fill out, and they're asking about your interest in a future expansion or a DLC to extend the story. Now, and I hope this isn't true, but I'm thinking they made the main story really short so that you're going to want to buy more DLC to make the game longer. And I really hope that's not the case. I wish that they would have just made the campaign longer from the get-go instead of just kind of banking on the future. But, you know, at the end of the day, we're not going to know what their intentions were here, but seeing with how the cash shop was handled, the DLC you can buy on Steam, and already asking about an expansion less than a week after launch has me a little bit skeptical here. We've covered a lot in this video so far, and I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me all the way to this point. At the end of the day, Dragon's Dogma 2, if you were a fan of the first one, Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen, you're going to like the second one. It's a great game. The combat's fun, and the exploration is fun as well. At the end of the day, I think I got my $70 worth out of this game. I got 59 hours. I could easily probably put in another 30 to 50 hours into the game if I wanted to do a new game plus. There's a whole nother area of the map that I haven't even started to explore, so I could dive into all that if I wanted to. But I honestly don't feel any incentive to explore since it just feels unrewarding at the end of the day. The combat's fun. The giant bosses are really awesome to fight and to climb on and to take down and hit those weak spots, while also trying to figure out your optimal party with the pawn system. At the end of the day, though, I don't know if I could recommend this game with the $70 price tag. I'd say throw it on your wish list and maybe wait for a sale. But if you're a fan of Skyrim or The Witcher or games like that, maybe go ahead and pick it up with the $70 price tag. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's your choice how you want to spend your money. I enjoyed my time with the game, and if you pick up the game, I hope you enjoy your time as well. That's going to wrap it up for this Dragon's Dogma 2 review video. Hopefully you enjoyed this video talking about everything Dragon's Dogma 2, everything the game has to offer, and my thoughts and opinions on the game. Hopefully you found this video useful and or entertaining. If so, don't forget that like button and subscribe to the channel for more action RPG videos. The best way to support me is through becoming a YouTube channel member today and or leaving a super thanks down on the video below. Your view alone means the absolute world. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.